Hello everyone. As you could probably already see from the timetables you were given, my speech is going to be about labor, alienation, and the right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to go so far left so I kind of loop back around to ethnofuturism. And so alienation, right? Something Karl Marx developed. Here, I think rather correctly identified this following psychological situation in which was a consequence of the Industrial Revolution, which was like this. So the worker no longer feels personal attachment, not to his labor, nor to his product, nor to the fellow workers. Rather, he feels like an ant or a cog in the machine, or as the previous speaker said, like an atom floating in a featureless, empty void. Not a human who has a social context. So before the Industrial Revolution, he was often a craftsman, more or less in total control of his produce and the transactions involved. Now, craftsmen were no more, most statistically now, to say this. Much later, this concept was actually brushed aside by leftists, the concept of alienation, as early humanist Marx, but I'll get to that later. So when they still accepted it, what was the solution that they offered? Let us look at the Soviet Union and its first of the basic ideas and then the model of the economy. So collectization, collective ownership of the means of production, right? The way that they implemented it, however, was such that only legally the Soviet worker was supposed to be unalienated, because in reality he was no less of a cog in the machine under the Soviet system. In fact, in a way, he was actually much more of a cog in the machine than under the oppressive capitalist society that they were criticizing. So, in other words, under state capitalism, the product of labor was just as distant as an industrial capitalist economy. This was slightly actually mitigated by small-time theft, which was very common. But this and the extensive shadow economy only served to prove both the inefficiency of the system and inauthenticity of such a solution. Now the left, and here follows the usual leftist critique of the Soviet Union, the logic is the following. If matters regarding the goods produced, for example, if there was a democracy in those state enterprises, if these matters were democratically decided, then the worker would feel more participation in the process of labor. But this actually has a very significant fault, because you can actually get alienated from any process. This includes the process of democracy itself. So there is only one peculiar situation in which democratization would have helped the Soviet Union, and that is if the enterprises had Greek shouting competitions type of democracy. Because you can't get alienated from your own body as easily. That's the most authentic type of democracy. But for now, that is unfeasible, and all this without even mentioning the vast economical inefficiency this would cause. Now I'm going to get back to why leftists brushed this concept aside. Because what this concept is against is it identifies this atomization of the individual as an issue itself. However, the modern left and modern egalitarianism in general views it as a positive thing. It views somebody lacking any kind of identity, in other words, any kind of context, once again, an atom floating in an empty void, as something to strive towards. And this is actually another way in which the Soviet Union went against, actually in favor of alienation by building this horrible blocky architecture that also caused, that also psychologically affected an individual in such a way that he feels even more alienated. So the leftists brushed this aside because this went against what they later adopted. So alienation could be very well a rightist thing, or a thing that the right could at least intellectually take away from the leftists. So Heidegger, for example, considered in a way alienation to be part of his de-worlding. But materialism cannot be solved with more materialism. So Marx and Heidegger are actually talking slightly different categories. But as for the common rightist, they tend to tiptoe the bourgeois claim that everything is all right, there is no problem with alienation, that it can be resolved with more bourgeois comfort, or in case of the actual right, a stronger sense of ethnic identity. But there's a problem with that. But first off, regarding bourgeois comfort. That is obviously wrong. That's a Huxleyan dystopian solution. And the second one does not. The second solution does not address race. So onto the bourgeois comfort. It is the pitfall that social democracies try to take, and this is where I'm going to make the argument that social democracies are not true leftists. So the bourgeois comforts, what are they? Shorter work days, higher salary, better working conditions. They are in no way inherently bad. They're not bad things, but that certainly are the final solution to the issue of alienation. So it's like doing heroin to cure cancer. You feel flaccid and you feel really good for a while, but the cancer's still there. So while the worker may seem to appreciate these bourgeois comforts, the problem still remains the problem of alienation. And there's actually an argument to be made that a comfortable but inauthentic mode of being is in some ways worse than an uncomfortable one. By the way, I think this alienation is why hobbies are so prevalent in the post-industrial revolution capitalist society. Because hobbies are essentially less institutionalized labor. That is done for one's own sake, and one has more or less total control of the end result. So it's undoubtedly more authentic than most other types of labor. But it's really a patch on an arm cut off, a distraction from the grand alienation that's going on everywhere else. Back to the rear right. The second critique the right offers is that the often parroted meme that communists think class density is the most important thing, but that's wrong because it's ethnic identity, something that's not constructed. Well, obviously that is correct, but this doesn't really answer the problem because the premise is in a way wrong. You see, the communists did not invent the class identity as itself, but really it was just a method to obtain the political power to enforce the solutions regarding alienation. So they didn't invent alienation itself. The issue of class identity was simply something that was created to help tackle the issue. So obviously ethnic identity is not constructed and it's more authentic and so on. But if we really want to, if the right really had wanted back in these years to fight class identity, they should have focused on the issue of alienation far more. So yes, the rise of class identity is a symptom of a problem, but not the problem itself. It's instead a fundamental matter of losing psychological closeness to the process of work, and as a result, and the result of the work, which is something we the right have neglected for far too long. And this is something I think we should start focusing on. So hypothetically, what would be the solutions viewed from the right? I don't believe there are any immediate ones. And secondly, we also no longer live in an industrial society, really. But perhaps we will soon kind of bounce back to that as cheap labor becomes more expensive and so on. But really, what have been the solutions so far? We have Fedor Kaczynski, the post-left solution. But that's not really... so yeah, start a farm going off the grid. Maybe, but there are several reasons why that alone is unfeasible on a civilization scale, and it is not the only choice anyway. So here is just one entirely hypothetical path to demonstrate one possible train of thought, and the right should develop many kinds of these trains of thought. Right, so one example is we could wait for technology to go so far ahead, the psychological relation to loops back around. In other words, automation would essentially take the jobs away from the working class. Positive eugenics would ensure that the working class basically decreases in size so significantly that there are no unemployed, that the unemployment is massively decreased. The global population should be significantly decreased. Automation would become personal, and self-sustainability would be once again possible thanks to automation, especially personal self-sustainability. The decrease in population would have positive effects on the environment, decentralization and deurbanization occurs, etc., etc., etc. This new situation ensures that the daily world perception is more archaic and authentic. So they are not only no longer a cog in the corporatist machine or the state capitalist enterprise, but rather both in control of the means of production and also that which is produced. Very utopian, very futuristic. In a way, it is maybe a libertarian utopia of cyber craftsmen. But for all this to be feasible, there has to be a convergence of catastrophes, which is a term you probably have heard, fate. Right, so this was only one and slightly utopian train of thought, and the right should develop far more of these. We went through the left and we arrived at something close to Fay's archaeofuturism, or maybe perhaps even ethnofuturism, and there's now two last points that remain. First off, the question of identity, which is, for us rightists, a very trivial one. It's simply a matter of why rob a person of that with which he was endowed at birth. That doesn't make any sense. And the second question is the question of non-alienation from technology. This is where ethnofuturism creeps in a bit more, which is mythologization of technology, which is something that could change our relation to it. Right, so this could bridge the gap between an archaic mode of thinking, an authentic design in a way, and the one we have right now. As an undoubtedly ethnofuturistic Estonian thinker, Valdo Mikita has put it, managing the potatoes, no, a grandma managing the potatoes in the garden through an Excel table. Unimpressive? Well, let me quote Ruben Kalev, nuclear codes in ruining stones. Now that is ethnofuturism. So to summarize, I am not offering an immediate solution, an immediate right-wing solution to the question of alienation, but I'm asking the right in general to take from the left something they seem to have dropped in favor of gender bending. That is the question of psychological relation to labor, which has been long neglected by the right. And it could be a powerful tool in our hands. If we pick it up, we have the potential to purge and marginalize the left and push them intellectually into the corner of obscure esoteric discussions regarding the stripping of all that makes us human. We have nothing to lose and much to gain.
You spoke of socialist alienation, but you didn't regard how it differs from capitalist alienation, for example. So could you give us a small comparison?
Okay, so what you're telling me is, no, actually I think I, in a way, equalized the situation under the state capitalist enterprise, also union, and the oppressive big corporate capitalist structures that existed before any kind of leftist revolutions. So I think I actually drew an equal sign there. But if there's anything you mean specifically?
Don't you see a difference between the alienation coming from commodity as the capitalist, as that which capitalism gives you, an endless amount of commodity which you can consume, compared to the socialist atomization of human?
I think, this atomization is not inherently socialist. Because I think both of these forces are driven by some egalitarian impulses, and maybe capitalism is worse in the way that it overwhelms you with all these commodities. But overall, the basic premise, I think, in both is the same, which is both of them distance you from some kind of authenticity. But also another point to make is that I unironically think that real socialism hasn't been tried, and I don't think it should. But yes, that's another point. So I can't really give you a great example from socialist side. So I think the only difference was that in the Soviet Union there were few types of commodities.